Ladies and gentlemen, Binnall of America!
And now, ladies and gentlemen, your host, Tim Binnall.
No commercials, no subscriptions, no network, no rules. And at the end of the day, my friends, no comparison. Welcome to another edition of BOA The Revival. Really looking forward to tonight's show. We're going to get into some interesting stuff that I've never explored before with a guest who I just recently discovered his work, and I was completely blown away. I've taken sort of a liking this summer, I guess you could say, especially, but over the course of many years doing the program, to strange history. Really find strange history very interesting. And our guest tonight, Kevin Guhl, runs the website thunderbirdphoto.com. And we'll get into that. We'll explain that as we get into this conversation tonight. He's the author. He's an author and journalist. He's the author of an anthology of American Strangeness, Volume 1 and a Volume 2 that just came out this summer, back in July. So he's got a couple of big books that are out, and they cover American Strangeness, as I said. He uncovers a lot of strange history, and he's done a lot of work looking into this Thunderbird photo, which we're going to explore right from the start. So with all that said, he's kind of mysterious, too. I'll be honest, folks. He's just kind of come on the scene, I think, in the last few years. And I had tonight when we sat down, it's the first time I've seen him. So it was like, oh, okay. It took me a while. I had to, because he doesn't really put his name all over the blog or anything too much. So I'm like, who is this guy? Even when I go to the about section, it's like, this is about the Thunderbird photo. And I'm like, who is this guy? Who is this guy? And so I'm very excited to get to know Kevin tonight here on the program and explore all the stuff that he's researched. So with all that said, the man of mystery himself, Kevin Guhl, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Hey, I'm happy to be here. Gee, I hope that intro, I hope I live up to all that mystery.
Well, we always start out the program with a first-time guest, the bio, the background. Who is Kevin Guhl, and how'd you get mixed up in all this?
Well, so I have a journalism background that I went to school for. It's how I started my career. I got into PR later on, which is like the other side of the fence. But despite having a lifelong interest in 4D subjects, and it's all because my school library stocked like Mysteries of the Unexplained books, and that, just kept going back to this. It was really the Thunderbird photo, like you mentioned, back in, I guess it was like 2018 or so. It was just one of the many, paranormal topics I read about. And as I went through the information that was out there, I'm like, gee, I feel like there are paths here that haven't been explored from an investigative standpoint, and so thus began, I connected with Hammerson Peters. I don't know if you've ever interviewed him. He's great. And we, just started digging into this, interviewing a lot of people involved. We're an Ivan T. Sanderson circle, and traveling out to Pennsylvania where a lot of Thunderbirds have supposedly been sighted. So that's been a long gestating book. But in the meantime, I've kind of branched out and just became fascinated with all these other strange topics buried in our history.
Yeah. And I confess, I'm a lifelong student of cryptozoology, but I guess the Thunderbird, the story of the photo, slipped past me. I didn't realize this was such a huge mystery in the history of cryptozoology. I was like, because I think I kind of picked everything back up around 2003. So by then, I think that photo, and you posted it in one of your blog posts. It's like the guys with the pterodactyl. That's the one that's like almost always people, And I thought that was just, not that was the photo, but that it was like a fake photo that was kind of circulating online. I didn't know this stretched back to like the 1960s, this apocryphal photo. So I don't even know where to begin. I want to recommend folks check out, obviously, your website, thunderbirdphoto.com. On there, you posted the first chapter from an anthology of American Strangeness, volume 1, I believe, that has the whole background on this. And I read that last night. I devoured that.
Yeah, you're talking about the mega chapter that gets the origin of the Thunderbird photo?
Yes. I devoured it.
That's not an American Strangeness. No. That's actually an excerpt from the forthcoming at some point. Yeah. So I put that out there as a, as a preview because so many people were asking. It's one of those topics that, just sometimes just because something grabs you so tightly, you don't know how other people feel about it. But anytime there's somebody posts on Reddit or wherever about that photo, it gains so much interest. And interestingly, so many people think they've seen this picture, which is an Old West photo of about like 6 cowboys standing in front of a large bird or pterodactyl in some accounts hanging on a barn wall or a building wall. And it sort of bridges this gap between like treasure hunt and cryptid hunt. Right? Like here's this piece of evidence that's supposed to be out there, and it drives people nuts that they think they've seen it, whether it be, and depending on the age of the person where they saw it tends to differ. You back really far, it was newspapers, then it became like men's magazines, like Saga, and on to, just magazines, Reader's Unexplained Books, and the internet. Only on the internet now we have a lot of recreations and fakes, so people probably have seen it, or they are remembering something that. So there's definitely this. It's thought that maybe there's this persuasive element of the description of it that implants.
There's the very Joshua Cutchin-y. I don't know if you know Josh Cutchin, but he wrote a book, Fourth Wall Phantoms, about sort of how fiction becomes reality. In a way, one wonders if this is sort of like what's happening here. But like, take us back first, for starters, to the origin. How did this story get planted in the paranormal zeitgeist, if you will?
So it goes all the way back to the 1890s in Tombstone, Arizona. It was an era when newspapers ran a lot of strange stories about dragon-like creatures and just bizarre things. There was an article they published called Found on the Desert about how these ranchers were on the desert just outside of town, and they came across this giant flying dragon-like creature, and they shot it down, and it was about the size of a 737 when they give the dimensions of the wingspan. And the article ends saying that they clipped off a portion of the wing and were going to head back to town to find eminent scientists to bring an eminent scientist to examine it and bring the pterodactyl back. So there was no picture. No mention of a photo. The epitaph. I've actually spoken with the current editor. He confirmed they didn't even publish photos in those days. They didn't have the capability until like around World War I. So then the first picture was, I think, for the Opera House or something. But anyway, so that story was out there.
Okay, let me just stop you 1 minute.
Yeah, go ahead.
So, because I may jump in, I should warn the listeners. You know how I get, folks.
Oh no, yeah.
So
please.
So the article was written.
Yeah, although it took decades to find it. For a long time that was undiscovered too. It wasn't this.
Okay, I thought that was apocryphal too. All right.
Yeah, it's people thought it was, and there were people who looked for it and couldn't find it. But then Mark Chorvinsky, who was the editor of Strange Magazine. I mean, if you really want to read a lot about the Thunderbird photo, the work that was done like in the late 90s, early 2000s, he covered it extensively in his magazine. And I believe he's the one who found the original article and published it in the magazine. So yes, the article exists. But what happened was, so in 1963, Saga magazine ran an article on what they called Thunderbirds, although it was connected to the Native American elemental being, which I always try to separate. It is connected, but I always try to make that distinction because I don't want to, be disrespectful. But the cryptid giant bird or flying creature has become known as Thunderbirds, and that goes back to this article in the 60s. And it told this story of the from Tombstone that we just discussed, but it had this addition to it that photographs were taken of the ranchers who shot the bird and other people in town, in front of this bird, tacked up to I think they said the wall of the Tombstone Epitaph office, actually. So, and if so that, and in that story, I mean, I don't know if you want to get into Kramer, but so this guy named Hiram Kramer.
Oh, believe me, I want.
Yeah. They believe that's where that story came. We'll get into that. But anyway, so it was in this magazine that caught the attention of Ivan T. Sanderson, who, for anybody who knows, he was one of the forefathers of cryptozoology.
Yeah.
He had an organization called the Society for the Investigation of the Unexplained. So, I've seen his notes on this, and he seemed like he was definitely intrigued by this topic. Over time, by the early 70s, he came to believe that he had once had a copy of this photo and had lent it out to two men who were part of his organization that went out to invest Thunderbirds in Pennsylvania, and they never brought the photo back. So he was pleading to the readers, does anyone have a copy of this? And that just started the ball rolling. And this was like the early 70s. And ever since then, people have been trying to find this picture and having memories of it. And when you take it all in aggregate, it doesn't all match up. There are different versions of the photo. There are people that saw it in different places, but there's a germ of something there, especially when I've interviewed people who knew Sanderson personally and were there during that time. And they say, two people who haven't, the two guys who went out to investigate, who Sanderson claims had the photo, they said they don't have it, or they didn't take it with them. But both of them told me the exact same story, and they hadn't spoken in decades, which was they remember being in his office. He had files after files on Fortean topics, which still exist, by the way, most of them. And he, and he showed him this picture, and one of the guys, Frank Graves, who his interview's out there with Hammerson Peters, and it's awesome if you've never heard it. He said, I wouldn't have gone out to Pennsylvania trying to find these birds if I hadn't seen this picture. It was it made that much of an impression on me. It was real. Now, they didn't, when it was sort of a bum trip. They met this guy Kramer, who was in communication with Sanderson and was the letter writer to Saga magazine, who shared the story in the first place. So that's sort of how the story got started.
Yeah, it's that piece you posted on the thing. As I said, I absolutely loved it. There was a lot in there. I have a feeling we're gonna get deeper.
I commend you. It's very lengthy. But
oh, dude, I read it from beginning to end and wanted more, so I couldn't wait to talk to you tonight.
Good.
So let's is it Kramer or Cranmer?
It's spelled Cranmer. I mean, everyone I spoke with. So I went out to Pennsylvania, and I met some of his former neighbors. He died in the 60s in a house fire, and he was an old man at that time. But I met some of his former neighbors, and they confirmed it was Kramer. It's pronounced Kramer, even though it's
right.
Kramer.
So that's why I know. Yeah. It's a character, so it's perfect. So this Kramer guy, just sort of spackle over some of the story here as we're going along. So he is the guy who put this into the zeitgeist, essentially, of the contemporary scene. What's remarkable to me, thinking about this, it didn't really dawn on me till we started talking tonight, but this guy who's kind of like a Pennsylvania eccentric, essentially.
Basically, just kind of living in a very, it's remote today. I mean, I've been to where his house was. It's beautiful, but it's remote up in the mountains. But even then it was more so. And, he was a World War I veteran. He got weakened by poison gas. And, he just had a big interest in folklore and history and in the Fortean. And, he collected a lot of magazines. He wrote letters everywhere. So other people I've talked to about him have said this too, that, he tended to maybe he was a little of a fantasist. He tended to believe a lot and sort of add to it. He was a great storyteller. So that was, and then unfortunately, he passed away, and he was rumored to have a copy of the photo as well.
Right.
That was lost in the fire. So
he explained. So he was the first to be like, oh yeah, they took a picture and it was in the newspaper. He said that he wrote this in the letter.
I found no other earlier reference yet. There are people who, after the fact, said they saw it before he brought it up, but there's no other print reference to it that I've found yet before Kramer. And his letter was published under his name in Fate magazine shortly after the saga, but you can tell it was the same. It was probably the same letter that he sent out to both. And Mark Chorvinsky is the one who identified Kramer. He's no longer with us, but I want to make sure he gets credit because he did so much work on this topic.
He passed away?
Oh yeah, he died back in the early 2000s, unfortunately.
Oh, that's too bad. Okay, so what struck me as remarkable in a sense is like you have to take yourself back to the 1960s to think about this, folks. But this guy, this eccentric in Pennsylvania, apparently knew about this story that was written in the late 1800s that actually took decades for people to find in the modern era. But he, in the 60s, knew about this story, which is pretty crazy because I mean...
Like, how did he find out about it, right?
Right. How did he even know about this?
According to him, the only clue he gave was he said a woman in Arizona told him about it. So now does that mean it was somebody who was there when something happened? Or, it's also possible that the only other place I think that it turned up, I mean, there's a book. It seems like it might have been not that common of a book, but it was called Further Reminiscences of a Ranger. And it was by, what is his name? I'm blanking on it right now. Bell.
All right.
Horace Bell. He a very fascinating guy who was involved in early California history. He wrote a couple of books. He was a ranger, a newspaperman, did a lot of other things. But he included it in that book. And he tied it into this whole saga of the Elizabeth Lake monster in California, claiming it was the same creature and that it ended up departing California and going to Arizona where it met its fate on the day.
It was ahead of its time.
Yeah. But he told that story. So did Kramer read that book? Did he have that book, or did he just get it secondhand from another person? Because I think he was in contact probably with other readers through Fate magazine or, just letters back and forth. So it's possible that he read it somewhere else. It could have been another letter that somebody wrote and that's just hasn't been discovered yet. So
right. Okay. Yeah. Still pretty remarkable though. Like in that day and age that he was aware of this crazy story.
Yeah, this one-off newspaper. A lot of these crazy articles from the late 1800s, they were one-offs. They might have been hoaxes. They might have been the writer having fun. There might have been something real, but they were just kind of here and there and gone and reprint it. So for somebody to have access to that and then it to turn into this huge ongoing legend is pretty remarkable.
Yeah, and that's why I stopped you when you were just starting out, because I was like, I'm like wishy-washy on the existence of this photo. So I was like, well, part of me after reading what you had put together on the site, I was like, I don't even know if the fucking article is true. Like that the article existed. It's
a lot. It's a lot.
So when you said that, I was like, whoa, all right, now hold on. Now it's getting even crazier. So I liked another point in your write-up is that those two guys, we can talk a little bit about that. I thought that was really interesting, but they come out to look for Thunderbirds in the 60s in Pennsylvania, and they meet up with him, and he's like more interested in showing them where he believes King Arthur died. And they're like, dude, we're here to find Thunderbirds. And he's like dragging them through the woods and shit to show them a rock with a chain on it or something. And it's like, oh my God, this guy must have just driven them crazy.
It's really funny because so Kramer became sort of pen pals with Ivan T. Sanderson. They had a lot of letters going back and forth over a number of years. And originally Sanderson wanted to go out himself, or he said he did. It didn't happen. So eventually he foisted on Frank Graves and Jay Blick. Frank was, a guy at that point, he was in his 20s. He had met Ivan T. Sanderson working because he was working at Ivan C. Sanderson's publishing company, Chilton. And they got introduced. And then Jay was like a neighborhood kid in New Jersey where Sanderson had his compound, and and so they like Jay was interested in strange stuff too. So they just sort of fell into his orbit, and so Sanderson gave him this mission to go out and meet Kramer in Pennsylvania and do some fact finding. And and then they end. I think Kramer was probably happy to have an audience coming to him, these young impressionable guys, and decided that, heck, why don't we go show them King Arthur's grave in the middle of the woods?
Yeah, I just thought that was so so weird, but also so kind of like on brand for this guy. It was very like.
And the car got stuck in the mud, and it was just a big disaster.
What I thought was interesting, these two young guys, you mentioned later in the thing that they never talked again after this weekend. So they didn't go on to become friends or buddies.
No,
they just went on this weekend trip.
Except for this experience. In Sanderson, I don't think they had much in common. They went on to live separate lives. Frank, he had a whole other career and, just doing different things. Jay, what did he do? I don't know. I interviewed both of them. Jay ended up working for his local township. Jay, unfortunately, I learned passed away a couple of years ago. Frank, as far as I know, is still going strong.
Yeah, and they were. Frank must be in his 80s now, right?
He's 80 or 81 now, I think. Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. It's remarkable to talk to someone who not only not met Ivan T. Sanderson, knew Ivan T. Sanderson. That's it's pretty.
It's
pretty amazing.
Great. He has a great sense of recall. I tested it too. He told me details about. There was a friend of his during this time in the 60s who had a really unique house with the decor was it had a canoe hanging from the ceiling and stuff. And later on that I saw the pictures. I saw pictures that Frank did post that this person posted on their Facebook of their old house that they didn't live in anymore. And everything he described, there were different weird statues and stuff. It was all there. So so that told me, I feel like he's pretty trustworthy in his memories. If you really want a good story, the Thunderbird thing was almost a blip compared to he went to the Nahanni Valley in Canada and explored the Headless Valley. And again, there's that video by Hammerson Peters on that called "The Interview with a Cryptid Hunter." Great storytelling. I don't want to spoil it. Just the thing that happened on that voyage. Really roughing it in a. These American kids going out roughing in the middle of the Canadian frontier in the mid 60s.
What were they looking for? Bigfoot?
Well, they were looking. I think there were stories of Bigfoot. There was. They were also the stories of the Headless Valley. Something was killing these miners and things. And he did have an encounter with a strange wolf that seemed like some kind of ghost. Or dire wolf or something, and somebody shot at it. It didn't harm it, and so there was some odd stuff that happened to him there. He claimed to have climbed up a mountain into an old cave and found a petrified spear. But unfortunately, as he was going down, he dropped it and lost it. But could you imagine?
Not always the way.
I know.
So Sanderson is kind of all right. I think I had this photo. I know I had this photo. It all gets very kind of murky. And what I thought was, you mentioned it, but what kind of swung me back over as I was reading this, because I'm this is bullshit. This is made up by that eccentric dude who is obsessed with King Arthur's grave in Pennsylvania, mind you. And I'm this guy just fucking made this up. But then when you get to talking to those two guys that were dispatched to Kramer, and they say they saw the picture that Sanderson had.
They did.
To me, then I was I don't know, maybe this thing is real. Yeah. They
were certain, and again, their memories of the photo differ a bit, but they were both both of them were immediately oh yeah, I saw that picture and da-da-da. And Hammerson talked to Frank first. I talked to Frank a lot too, but when I called Jay sort of cold and just tried to broach the topic without giving too much detail, immediately, that stuck out in his memory from all those decades ago. And there are other people that aren't in that article that have interviewed. They'll be in the book, but there are other people who were in that circle too, who told very similar story. So, it's so you're either dealing with just an incredible trick of the human brain,
Right.
or where there's smoke, there's fire, and then you can start to talk about, well, was the photo real? Was it a really good fake? Was it was it one of these? There was a whole series of postcards during that, during the early 1900s. Like they called them, they're called like hoax postcards now, but they were like exaggeration postcards. They sort of played on the abundance of like the Rust Belt. So they would show like sometimes it'd be like giant chickens or apples.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I think I kind of know what you mean.
Yeah, but some of it was joke. It was kind of joking too. Like you had like giant grasshoppers because they dealing with locusts and things like that. So it was early like Photoshop. It was like a cut and paste, but some of them are really good. Like there were some artists, and these postcards were sold in gift shops, and as people would drive around the country and mail them back home. I have several like originals that I got for pretty inexpensively, online, and some of them, they still have the messages on the back and stuff, which is cool. But from like 1920 or whatever.
So what the theory is that maybe it came from there.
That's one theory. Yeah, a couple people have brought that up. I explored it in another article that's on my site too. I think it's the strong if it's a fake, that's I think the strongest candidate for what it would have been. However, I've searched through so many of those postcards and looked at so many books, and if it's out there, I think it's got to be an obscure one, because you start to see there were certain postcards that had a wide printing, and they would put different town names on them and things like that. But then there were very localized ones too. So it's possible that the Thunderbird photo could be out there in in an antique shop. Most antique shops, you go in there and they have those bins of postcards. I always check those when I'm in one of those.
I'm going to start checking those now too. Yeah,
definitely. You never know.
What I thought was interesting too is one of the guys from that trip said he made a good point. I think it was him who said it, but it was something like that. He could have, if Sanderson could have copied it. Like he's like, I wouldn't have taken the photo because he could have made a copy and given it to me. That was the other part that kind of like sticks out in my mind, of where it's like, this is like kind of even more confusing, because it's like, why didn't anyone who had the photo, when the photo was sort of floating around back in the day, I mean, it wasn't impossible then to copy a picture. It's like somebody could have taken a picture of the picture just to reproduce it, but it's like apparently not.
He had he had a copy machine, we're like an late 60s, early 70s copy machine. I don't know if that was mimeograph or what it was exactly, but yeah, I mean, a few people have confirmed that he did. And actually, if you look in the files of his that are available, you'll see like early photocopies of different documents and things like that. Right. So he did. Why would he give this picture to these two guys going into the field and not keep the original? I don't know. But both of those guys claim that didn't happen. One of the reasons I called them initially was I said, you guys are kind of taking the heat for this, so I want to give you an opportunity to set the record straight. And Frank said he didn't recall that they had the photo with them. He does not have a memory of that. And his recall is so strong. I think that's true. Jay, he insists they didn't. He said they did have like a letterhead from Sanderson with a letter of introduction. Isn't that so quaint? A letter of introduction.
I know. I like that a lot. Yeah.
Sanderson, like a British gentleman, grew up in the in the like World War I era, but
yeah. He like dispatches these two guys with a letter from him, where it's like, kindly please treat my guys kindly here. They've been sent on a mission to find
some mutton and give them lodging for the night. Yeah.
I don't know how much you're into UFOs and stuff, but you should check out the Saucerian, the book, The Saucerian. I just spoke to the author, Gabriel McKee, on a couple weeks ago for Binnall America, and it's the biography of Gray Barker, but it's like weirdly
about Gray
tangential. Yeah, you should check it out. It's a fantastic book, and it's like reading the part of your research that you put up there was like, okay, this is kind of running like simultaneously with a lot of the weird shit. Because like Keel pops up in the thing that you posted. And Keel's like bouncing around in that world too. And it's like
he's friends with Sanderson.
Yeah.
It's photo.
Crazy time. Yeah.
Keel, is on record from like the early 90s having, I think it was in Fate magazine and also Strange, having a memory of seeing the photo and that Sanderson showed it to him. And I believe I mentioned it in that article. So I corroborated at least that at the right time, Keel was even there with Sanderson. Oh yeah. Sanderson was writing a letter to, I think he was writing a letter to the editor of Fate magazine. And he just mentions, oh, I'm here with John Keel. And they were like joking around, so it's like, okay. And they were talking about the photo. So it's just so cool. So much of the stuff, like there's so much history to it that makes me think, I feel like there's more history than a lot of other, Fortean stories. Like, so even if it's unresolved at this point, it really does take you back into just the history of that group. Like even Al Bielek is part of this too.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's crazy. Yeah. It's so Sanderson sent this letter to Fate and he was like, hey, I lost this photo. Does anyone know where it is or what, like whatever. Is that kind of what
Sanderson didn't send the letter to Fate? Well, he sent a letter to the editors just asking. Actually, that might have been asking for. I believe he was looking for a copy of the article at that point, or was he looking for the? I need to check on that. But yeah, so he was looking for it. He did contact these magazines, but his appeal, his public appeal for it, was in his newsletter, this Pursuit.
Okay, all right.
A couple of times,
that was my
years leading up to his death. Yeah.
All right. So I guess how long has this been sort of like a running, cold case of the paranormal world? It's a very unique story. It's like lost media. It's really one of the few lost media stories from the paranormal. But how long has it been? How long has this been like sort of a mystery, a standalone mystery of its own, if you will?
Well, so I would say ever since Sanderson, wrote about it in like 71, 72, he wrote about it a couple of times.
Yeah.
That got a lot of, you got to remember his followers were a lot of those people who became big names in the Fortean world, right. Lauren Coleman. And, there's a guy named W. Ritchie Benedict. To add to the lost media aspect, he remembered Sanderson appearing. He thought it was the Pierre Burton show in Canada in the 60s and showing the picture on television. He's like, that's what I remember. He's like, it wasn't in a magazine. It was on television. So of course, I'm reaching out, as soon as I hear that, I'm reaching out to all the Canadian archives. And of course, if you know anything about television from the 1960s, a lot of it is gone. They were, a lot of it, especially tapes. Yeah, they reused it. They thought we're not going to repeat this. This material is expensive. Like early Doctor Who, I still cry at night over the missing episode. But similar situation. There are some episodes of it. However, I talked to Burton's gone, but I talked to his assistant. Like, do you remember like 40 years ago if A90 Sanderson was on your show? But she didn't have any, like, I don't even know if they had a record of him being on there, although some TV listings confirm he was on the show, not necessarily talking about this, but like I think about sea serpents. But those episodes just aren't in the holdings of some of the different institutions that have some.
Crazy. So it's sort of been like a mystery since the 70s, and it just keeps kind of like
mystery and quest. It's a quest for many people. It
really
drives people mad looking for this thing. I've been into, but a lot of people, have just tried to turn over different rocks, have taken their turn trying to get to the bottom of it. And it just keeps branching out and never really, and getting more mysterious and murkier and not really having a resolution.
Yeah, it's a crazy story. It's a really crazy story. Like I said, I remember seeing the awful pterodactyl one that's like went around a lot. That was like viral almost. And
that's like, I would call that the pterodactyl is kind of like a newer, sort of new, not really new, but a newer chapter to it. Going back to John Keel thought it was like a prehistoric animal or, like a pterodactyl or something in the picture. The oldest accounts talk about a bird. Although it's kind of funny because the original Tombstone story is a giant pterodactyl-like creature.
Right.
But the original articles, the first references to the photo and the people I interviewed, I have firsthand memories of it, say it was a large feathered bird. A lot of them say it was looked like a large crow or a raven.
Right. Yeah.
Which leads to me, I start calling them thunder crows just because that's catchy. But a whole bunch of sightings on top of that, to this day of large, corvid-like birds. But anyway, the really prominent photos of a pterodactyl-like creature show Civil War soldiers standing on it or in front of it with the bird on the ground. And there are two different versions of that. And I think it was Lauren Coleman who determined that those photos were created for the TV show Freaky Links back like it was 1999, 2000. They did an episode where they were, and they also had that was one of those early shows that had an online sort of ARG aspect. The kid who was in the show, he, you could go to his website. And so he talked a lot about kind of the Thunderbird photo and, but they had these pictures of these Civil War soldiers. So they did a different spin on it. But that spin, though, from a fictional program has become part of the reality for a lot of people. I've seen that picture. I've seen a picture like that. It's possible. It's possible there's something and in some cases the pterodactyl's hanging on the wall, not a bird. So, I don't like to dismiss anything because there's so many people that are very passionate about it.
Yeah, I didn't realize there was such a community of people who were trying to get to the bottom of this. It's really crazy. I'm completely blown away that this mystery even exists. It's wild.
Yeah.
Now I guess one thing that I did want to ask you as we were just to sort of wrap up, I suppose, this part of the conversation was that could we even prove it at this point? I'm concerned with the way that pictures can be fabricated now. It's how would you even know if you had I guess you would have to have a super old physical copy of the picture that is, incredibly old. It would be over 120 years old now.
I need to hold that old magazine in my hands, or I've seen people try to look at the picture I found in a book, and they put it there. Some people have even tried to put print around it, but until you know the provenance of it, or you find that original publication, it's going to be it's one of it. That's something, and since the time I started researching this, that's something that's massively changed, which is AI. It's
right.
I can go on right now and create a convincing Thunderbird photo. I had an artist, and I'm glad I did this. I had an artist create a couple different artists create their own versions of it just for, to use as artwork. And, today I could go on and make one, but, I'm glad I paid them for it. But, it's amazing, so you have to, you would have to really, slap that magazine down and say, there it is,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, not to belabor a point I often make on the show, but they could not just make a facsimile of the photo. They could make a fucking video.
Absolutely.
Of someone going, I have the photo, and that would be almost at first you'd be like, oh well, shit, the guy's got it. He's on video holding the super old photo, so of course it's on the level. And then it's no, the whole. Mind blown. The whole fucking thing is AI. The whole thing, the hand, the photo, the room that he's in, it's all fucking, it's a house of mirrors, man. So unless you can really see with your own hands, or a reputable news organization went and documented the actual photo or the magazine or whatever, the original source. It's I don't know. You can't believe anything on the internet right now, especially and with a mystery like this, it's real hard to lost media. Yeah, real hard to get to the bottom of now.
It just has to be reproducible. If somebody identifies where it appeared, then somebody else finds a copy of that magazine, and there it is.
Right.
But I got to just the wonder. There is sometimes I do wonder though. do I want it to be found? Because you talk about the community around it and the fascination and the mystery. You know, I was following. I don't know if if you followed the whole celebrity number 6 mystery.
Yeah, vaguely. Yeah.
Thing, you know, there was this fabric that all these different celebrity illustrations of these like celebrities drawn on the fabric, and there was one person they couldn't identify. And there were these great communities on social media, everybody like trying to figure out what it was. How about this person? How about that person? Well, it was finally solved. It was this model who, you know, a lot of the people on the thing were like movie stars or TV stars. This was like a fashion model. Yeah. And ever since then, you go back to those forums and it's like quiet, and that's it. It died, you know, and it's that there's an answer. But I think, you know, the hunt and the search is the enjoyable part of it for a lot.
Right. Yeah. I've talked about this before on the show. Yeah. I've kind of taken an interest in that phenomenon with, I've noticed it with, true crime. You know, when they solve the case, it just changes the whole tenor of the group. Whether, you know, in some instances, it's like they debate the veracity, you know, whether the guy they got is the real guy or whatever. But in other instances, it's just like it kind of dies out. You know, it's like, oh, well, the case is solved. Forrest Fenn's treasure was like that. That was like a huge community of people. And once they found the treasure, it just completely went, they went haywire for like a couple of weeks, maybe a few months. And then now it's just like a ghost town.
Are you talking about the one, the guy buried it in the wood, the wealthy guy buried it? Yeah. That was, I saw the documentary on that not long ago. That was, you know, just the lens, you know, sort of the convoluted reasoning that some of the searchers came up with that could, you know, it could make sense, but it was just much simpler. I really relate to that. Like I can understand how you get so wrapped up and, you know, your brain just tumbles around coming up with these theories. And then in the end, it was just, it was like, you know, Occam's razor essentially.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Your mind starts turning into like a Rube Goldberg machine of like, well, this, and then this leads to that, and this explains why that is this way. And now I think I'm close to figuring it out. It's like, no, you've just gone completely in a maze. So I don't know. I only really kind of got tipped off to this story like in the last week. So I'm not sure how I feel about whether or not whether I would want the mystery solved, but I can see your perspective and it's really cool. It's really cool mystery. I'm really blown away by this. I'm really surprised I didn't realize it was such a thing. I think I just kind of saw
it's the original lost media, really. I mean, we see it go, we see how far it goes back.
And I don't even know whether or not if I believe it's even real, because like I said, I was kind of
I go back.
Yeah, I go back and forth. Yeah. It's like a part of me does. You kind of mentioned like false memory and stuff, where it's just like maybe they just kind of remember seeing it, and then other shit. You know, your mind kind of fills in the blanks of other stuff, and you're like, yeah, I'm sure I saw it, but it's like, no, it turns out you didn't. But I don't know.
There's a book called The Memory Illusion, and that'll really like shake your faith in the human brain, you know, and its ability to, you know, it feels like when AI hallucinates, that's what it feels like is really, it's like just reproducing our brain and just how it can just like make up stuff.
Yeah, exactly. It's crazy. Now on the blog, thunderbirdphoto.com, you've branched out beyond the Thunderbird photo, but you did originally started out with a lot of interesting stuff on sort of flying creatures.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have a specific sort of question, because I told you I wasn't going to hit you with any super deep cuts, but I guess just talk a little bit about sort of your interest in flying cryptids, because you talk about, you mentioned a lot of sort of accounts of like dragons and
dragons or American dragons
and various stuff like that. It's like, I mean, I know there are folks doing sort of aerial cryptid research, but aerial cryptids are kind of like, they're the low end of the spectrum, if you will. It's like it seems like there's very few aerial ones, quite a few land ones, and God only knows what's down in the water. So it's you
Thunderbird,
can't even
Rodney Dangerfield of the cryptid, community. No respect, but it's starting to pick up. I'm noticing more people interested in them. I think it's because you would think a large flying creature would be much easier to find,
right.
But it's nevertheless there are many reports. But to go back to like the dragon-like creatures, I got into them because when I started investigating the Thunderbird photo in the original Tombstone account, I mean that's just one of many articles from that time period like that. That's just the one that happened to get this whole photo legend tied around it. So yeah, there are a bunch of them. I think one of my favorite ones outside of the Tombstone story is the one that it's the first thing in the book, in the new book, because I just love it. Which was there was a train, an express train, going across the desert in California, and it according to the story, got accosted by this flying snake-like creature with big wings that attacked the train. And the keep in mind, this is the Wild West, like the 1890s. The cowboys on board like rolled, pushed down the windows and were firing their pistols at this thing. So it was like a cowboys and dragons.
Yeah.
And when they got back, when they got back to the station, they a bunch of people on the train apparently testified to this, including the engineer and the fireman, which I think is the one who would control the coal and stuff. So there are these outlandish accounts, and some of them are more outlandish than others, but they're common. So you can view them as they're just newspaper fantasism from the day, or you could say is it some kind of high strangeness that some of it and then there's kind of in between where there's a story there were a lot of articles on it called the Fresno Dragons. Essentially what was described were like two pterodactyls kind of like hanging out around Fresno in the swampland. Come to find out, one of the theories in the day, and and claimed to be the source of the story, was that there were these it was called the Kauai colony. They had set up shop in the what became the Redwood National Forest, and I think they were logging was like one of their means of surviving, and the U.S. government decided this is going to become parkland, and they were evicting them. So there was this standoff with the government, and like they brought in the cavalry, and supposedly these colonists imported these large ferocious birds, which they don't give the actual name of it, but I think it was a cassowary. Which are called like man-killing birds. If you like, they kind of look like an ostrich or an emu, but they're very they can be very aggressive and have a really powerful kick. And
their feet are like, anytime anyone like wants to point out that birds came from dinosaurs, they're like, if you just take a look at this thing, feet,
and it's got like
dinosaur feet.
Yeah, and it's got like a crest-like protuberance on its head.
Right.
So
crazy.
So apparently, or supposedly, this story might have originated with these colonists bringing these large, flightless, but sort of primitive-looking birds in, because these birds are known to kick and kill horses. So the government's coming, soldiers are coming in on their horses, the cavalry, and so, I don't think there ever was a battle or anything like that, but that was the story. So. Could that have, did people see those and didn't know what they were? I mean, I can say one time I was in the woods in Ohio, and I saw what I think were emus. Like why somebody had emus, why they were there, I don't know. But I'm on the path in the distance. They crossed the path, and I was on a bike, and I got up there, and they were gone. But I was like, I can imagine it's a bit of a weird, of a weird moment when you see something like that. So
yeah, that's true. That's entirely true. Thunderbirds, they don't get enough respect, but I cover news all day, every day for Coast to Coast. I never see Thunderbird stories. It's like, man, I want to see more Thunderbird stories. So people,
there are hot spots. there are definitely hot spots. Pennsylvania, I've done the most research into north central Pennsylvania, which is where Kramer was from, because he also claimed to have these sightings, and there are a lot of reported sightings, especially during the 70s. I've interviewed some of the witnesses, and they're not, like Kramer, who I think tended to exaggerate a little bit, says they were 25 to 30 feet wingspans, but a lot of other people I spoke with told like the exact same story about like early 70s seeing this like bird with a 12-foot wingspan, which is larger than an eagle. It didn't look, only maybe the California condor would come close, and but it didn't look like that, and that would be so far out of range for that to probably be possible. But so it's like, was it a giant individual bird? Was it? We just don't know. But it's like, there's so many reports, and so you wonder what was going on. And then Illinois is another one. Texas, big bird, of course, is like more of a pterodactyl like creature that people saw like in I think the 70s. So well,
not to throw too much shade on Kramer any further, but I recall that I think you mentioned that he told someone that he confidently told someone that Thunderbirds, they eat like 50 people a year, something crazy like that. He's like 50. Yeah, I think it was like 30. It was a 30 thing. They take 30 people a year. And most of them are children. And it was like, bro, how do you what are you fucking talking about?
I'm telling you, Kramer was like the early David Paulides missing 411. What Kramer did is he looked at all these disappearances and attributed them to Thunderbirds, right? He reported there are some articles where he gives lists of all these like people who disappeared. That's wild. And some of them kids, and but he claimed that he says confidently they were picked up. The Thunderbird takes them to the top of the mountain and like pecks out their brains, and it's like, Jesus. And so what you need to do if you want to find these missing corpses is to go up to the top of the mountains where the Thunderbird roosts.
Right.
And it's funny because what he's saying is not too different from some of the versions of the Native American Thunderbird, especially up like Pacific Northwest.
Yeah.
Same kind of story. Giant bird, more giant bird than like elemental sort of in the clouds, picks up whales from the ocean, picks up people in their kayaks and flies them up to the top of the mountain and eats them. I mean, so it's like the same kind of story, only, I don't know how much Kramer read into folklore about this, or if he just came to his own conclusions.
Yeah. He seems like the kind of guy that I would love to have on the show. Just a fascinating dude. Yeah. That's a real interesting character. Although he'd probably he'd probably go off on this fucking King Arthur thing. And we'd be at the end of the show and I'd be like, well, we got to get off the King Arthur thing, dude.
So just because we've mentioned this, and I'm sure there are people who are curious, I'll talk about it real quick.
Yeah, he'll be. Yeah, right now he's looking down on us.
Yeah, he's looking down. I can't.
Yes.
We believe that King Arthur came to the New World looking for the Fountain of Youth, of course, right? Or the magical healing waters, sort of like it was his Avalon, right? But he died here and was buried in what was like a stone crypt. So I think there really was like a cairn or, some kind of stone ruins that he was associating with this. And a friend of mine, Lou Bernard, who lives out there and has researched all this stuff too, said there was actually right on the same land, like in that same area where like these ruins supposedly were, these like these stone structures. It was Arthur. It was some kind of construction company or something with the name Arthur. So like it could have been kind of, sort of folded into that in local lore. Yeah.
He was like this guy championed this story. Like it was.
Oh yeah. He also said FDR died in a plane crash in Pennsylvania. All this stuff came and happened right there where he lived in Pennsylvania. He said he died in a plane crash and it was covered and like a double took over.
Yeah, I wondered that. Yeah, when I read that, I'm like, wait, how did that even work?
I want to know. You want to know more, right? Like you read the stuff, you're like, I know my bullshit meter is going off, but I want to know more. I want to know more.
Yeah. It's like, tell me more about this crazy ass fucking theory you got, dude. One of the interesting subjects you cover on the blog, sort of more recently, and I had really kind of I think this might have come up with Robin Morgan recently. He's going to be on the show soon. But like sort of cryptobotany.
Yeah.
This is, I guess, I mean, people can kind of do the math. It's like cryptozoology, but it's cryptobotany. It's sort of like out of place, mystery plants.
Yes. So my newest book, it was originally going to have sort of a centerpiece on man-eating plants in North America. Okay. Only I came to discover as I researched that there was so much material around the world, and most people who are into this, they might have heard of the Madagascar man-eating plant. That's the most popular original, but there are just so many stories from the late 1800s, early 1900s, but actually, in a sense, going back further about, hidden in the jungles of the world, these large carnivorous plants capable of eating people. So, it's going to be that spoiler. That's going to be my next book. But so I've been doing a lot of research into cryptobotany, as it were.
Interesting. So this is a widespread sort of phenomenon of these of legends of plants. Interesting. Weird.
And me, I'm not saying like, do I think a lot of these stories are credible? Probably not. But I like dissecting the legend, and then you do discover there are some truths buried in there as well. Before there were stories about like actively carnivorous plants, there was the upas tree in Java, which was said to be a tree that it would emit this poisonous gas that no one could approach it without dying. There were skeletons littered around the tree of animals and people. Yeah. And the story was that the natives, if there was somebody that was condemned, like for murder, or condemned to death,
to be executed,
yeah, they would give them a chance at having that sentence commuted by going to collect sap from this tree, which they would use on their spears.
Yeah.
And so that story was circulating since the 1700s. Wow. Charles Darwin's grandfather, Erasmus Darwin, included it in a book he wrote about plants and helped popularize the story. But he took it as fact, because this story, had been out there and like in the press, in the 1700s and so forth. So in the UPA, so that for decades and decades there was that story, and so modern research shows that there really is a tree. It's not exuding poison gas, but the natives kept this tree. It's called Antitaris. The natives did like kind of keep this tree a secret, or because they did. The sap was very poisonous, and they would use it in their weapons. The only way that's pretty much the only way you would die from it. If you got
right, yeah,
bloodstream. But there also there are also accounts from like pretty trusted sources that area, in Java, it's very volcanic, and apparently there was this crater that where there used to be a volcano that might have been emitting carbon dioxide that was like kind of settling near the ground. And so apparently it was littered with skeletons, and like, there's a letter from like this scientist. He went there, and he unfortunately sent like dogs down to test it, and they died. And there were skeletons down there because people might have gone down there. So, and there are other places in the world where like I think near Mount Vesuvius, where there are sort of these like there's a grotto there where, or at least at one point in time, this carbon dioxide would collect not very far off the ground, but it would be deadly. It would overpower like if a small animal went in there. Yeah. So it's thought that this valley became folded into the Upas tree legend, which kind of explains like, this poison gas aspect. So like when you dig into it, there are these fascinating stories, and there were, and and then in Madagascar, that's where like this tree that would actually eat people. There were these stories, in the 1800s. There really is another sort of tree like the Upas with poison, and the way the locals there would they believed that everything was inhabited with spirits, and it could be good, it could be bad, but the way they would solve like serious issues you would have to drink the poison, and if you vomited the poison out, the spirit in you rejected it, and or the spirit in the poison made that happen, and you were innocent. If you didn't vomit it up and died, then you were guilty.
This is like the witch trials. Yeah.
It was outlawed. It was eventually outlawed. But not until sometime in the 1800s. I think the 1860s it might have been. So, so there are these like traditions that are kind of spooky, but sometimes they get a little mangled in the retelling.
Yeah, there's like a germ of truth to them. Interesting.
Yeah, and you have the Venus flytrap, which and the sundew, and and you have real carnivorous plants. So Erasmus Darwin first wrote about the Upas tree. Then Charles Darwin, his grandson, wrote a book called Insectivorous Plants that he spent 18 years researching. And Darwin, and it was one of his last books, and and he was very, impressed. It impressed upon him how similar the digestive system of the plant sort of was to the human stomach, like the way these plants would close and digestive enzymes would pour in and dissolve the food. So, just drawing this like maybe we're not so different from the plants, and so
interesting. Yeah. Now another post on the blog, and I'll plug it again here, thunderbirdphoto.com, is an exploration of shoddy and sensational 19th century journalism. I thought this was really interesting because, I've had lots of folks on to talk about strange history over the years, especially recently. And it always sort of comes up that, like, you have to take some of these stories with a grain of salt because they would write these zany stories just to fill space back in the day. And the piece that you wrote is an interesting exploration of that because you almost never sort of see the contemporaneous reaction from the other media who are like, hey, what the fuck are you doing? Like, what are you doing? Why are you writing?
I love the newspapers sniping at each other. I love it. Yeah. Again, I went to school for journalism. It's my background. It's still something I'm passionate about. I just channeled in this way. So seeing like how just sort of like, the newspaper ethics aspect of it, but just that it's a case study and sort of how these things worked, especially at that point in time, right. So it's, and there are still mysteries wrapped up into it, but you also see all these weird tales and you can kind of see how they fudge the truth, or they didn't reveal certain things, or they just said, well, this is what was said to us. And they would close out an article about like a river monster with, it's probably a misidentification, without, so but they've still put the news out there, and and that made an impact. So,
right. Well, yeah, like I said, it was really interesting because you sort of have these accounts from like the other newspapers where the New Era was the one that was like they'll print like fucking anything.
Oh yeah, the New Era out in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and so that article we look at like all their competitors because. Back then, a town like Lancaster would have like 4 newspapers, and some of them having a different political bent or whatever. But and you would see the New Era, a story they had about a headless ghost got picked up by the Illustrated Police News, not the British version. There was an American version, which is great. If you ever, it's hard to find. The Library of Congress has this Illustrated Police News, and like they have like. PDFs of like going by year, and it's like I don't think it's searchable when I've tried. So you really got to scroll through it, but you find all these cool illustrations and just crazy stories, and that was one of them. So of course, like some of the other newspapers were a little PO'd that their competitor got this attention on a national stage.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Yeah, it's remarkable because you don't know what to make of some of these old timey stories. They sound great. Then it's like, I don't know. People, I don't ever want to be like one of those people that a lot of people just dismiss all this stuff out of hand. Where it's like, well, they had to have made it up. It's like, well, you don't know that. You don't necessarily know that they made it up, and they could have, got hyperbolic on the story, or like added extra color to something that could have happened that was really weird.
I mean, I think I take a pretty objective perspective the way I write. Like, I kind of leave it up to people to decide and just give all the facts. But I also don't think anyone should be too quick to dismiss some of these things. I mean, for example, there's a story in my first book called The Illinois Cloud Man. Yeah. So here's this weird old story for, I think it was in the Midwest, like St. Louis area. There was a report of the clouds forming into this like human shape and came like walking after these farmers like traveling down the road. And then there was this explosion, and you're like, okay, right? And it was pretty vivid, like it looked like a person. Well, come to find out, and it's only in like maybe the last, in the 2000s, we've captured video of what is called a dead man walking tornado. And what happens is multiple funnels come down on the end of tornado, and it can take on the shape that looks like a person, like kind of walking around, and they tend to happen also in some of the worst tornadoes. I think it was it an F4 in Texas, I want to say the one video was from. It kind of looks like it's even holding a scythe, and I mean, it's a
wow
video, but you see that and you're like, and when this happened, there were a lot of like storms and things going on, so that could very well be what they saw. But how, they don't have they can't call the Weather Bureau and say, what was this? It looked like a man, it looked like a cloud man coming together.
Interesting. Wow.
And and it is creepy because in the one that was videotaped, like right after that, it plowed through and like killed a bunch of, the tornado killed a bunch of people and, and destroyed a lot of homes. And so, there is kind of this dark, omen nature to it. We can explain it, but it doesn't change the effect that it has, on our psyche, I think. So.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Walking Dead tornado. I'm gonna have to look that up.
That's Dead Man Walking. Yep.
Dead Man Walking. All right. Yeah. Okay. I got it right the first. All right. Dead Man Walking. Type that up.
Did I say F4 too? I think is it E4? I think whatever they designate tornadoes.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah. No one's gonna write to us about it. Don't worry.
if I get anything wrong about Bigfoot, you'll hear about it. But a tornado, I don't know.
One interesting thing you picked up on and wrote about at the blog and in the books, I think it's in the second book, is both haunted TVs and phantom cars, and sort of this idea that new technology comes along and then pretty shortly thereafter sort of eerie events become associated with it, like without fail. It seems to be a almost human nature, or or the nature of the paranormal. I don't know, but it's an interesting phenomenon, if you will. I guess talk about that a little bit. Sort of like TV comes along, and then all of a sudden there's haunted TVs, and then cars come along, and there's these phantom cars.
There's definitely, I think there's an element of fear of a new technology, but there's also it sort of inherits ghosts of a previous age. Like so the car came on the scene, quickly changed society, and almost immediately there were ghost stories about it. And prior to that, there had been stories about like phantom carriages, which were very prominent both in Europe and here in the United States. So these phantom automobiles, you sort of had different subsets. You got to remember that you're living in a small town back then. The train probably comes through a couple times a day. People travel through on horse and carriage. Suddenly, people can just tear through in these, relatively fast for the time moving automobiles going to different towns. They're strangers. You don't know who they are. So there were all these. They were called phantom automobiles, but they were kind of more like troublemakers. And some of them, some of it was probably kind of like Dukes of Hazzard, like when Prohibition was starting to come into effect, they had to like smuggle in the rum at night, across state. Like that. That's an element of it. But there's also a paranormal version of phantom cars. Like, some of it was associated with people who died in car accidents. Like there's a story, like there were a lot of, there's a story about test drivers, who would test out, the new cars as they were being made. And one of them died in a road accident. And not long after that, like his people who knew him, like other drivers and I think a mechanic, saw him like driving along. Like he pulled up like right beside them, and and they recognized their friend who. Yeah. So there's definitely this. I do think it's an element of human nature that we we tend to attach these. I don't know if it's a search for meaning or a fear or just sort of this otherworldly element to sort of the cold mechanics that that are presented to us.
Well, there's like accounts of like ghost voicemails and stuff like that. So
exactly. Calls from the dead. There are a couple great books on that. Phone calls. From the dead. And today I think it evolves to I don't know if it's creepypastas, but different, just different things that pertaining to the internet, and so anything. I think anything we come up with, it's never just a cold, process. I think we just as people, we attached a greater meaning to it. I think. And so you see this. I do track. It's a theme in the book. I track this with phantom automobiles, but also television, which
right.
No sooner in the 1920s did television signals start being broadcast. Most people didn't even have sets, and it was, centered around New York City. You had people saying that people were spying on them through the television signals, and they didn't have to have a television set. It was like coming through their mirrors, which the mirror has long been associated with
that's wild.
Other realms. They thought that there were like little men coming out through the television signals and, into their rooms and accosting them and stealing their money. And
what?
Very like, so that, there were these stories were tracked, early on, and television, poor. They give you hear from like the poor, like executives at like these television companies in the early days that hear from like, they would take calls from the public. Like a woman was saying, like, my baby was kidnapped through the television, and then they look into it and learn, I guess, from the police. Remember, this woman didn't even have a child.
Oh, jeez.
So, as is pointed out in the articles back then, some of it was associated with mental illness, but I think there's also like kind of a misunderstanding. And then when most people started having TV sets, which is like World War II delayed it. Delayed the onset of the television. But then once people started having the sets in their homes, you started having like the technical TV goes, but, where an image would get stuck on the screen of a face, but it freaked people out, and like some people in their mind, that's my grandfather who died 2 months ago,
Right.
We can't, no matter what we do, we can't get this image off the screen. We turn it off, we disassemble it, put it back together. It's still there. They didn't necessarily understand like, the electrons, like burning it into the screen. And, so, there, even though there are these explanations, it became, just all these kind of like superstitions and fears and ghost stories associated with it.
Yeah. I remember how that, shit used to get burned on the screen if you left your TV on for too long.
And then there were ghosts who like there was ghosts that apparently they would tend to come out around TV time, like they seemed distracted, to the television signal. There were funny stories. There were funny stories about people whose the TV would turn itself on until they realized. Like in one case, which is one of my favorite stories, the guy realized when it was his dog snoring, like the dog was snoring at this perfect pitch that would set off the remote box and turn the television. So, So it's a lot. I love going back in time and seeing that these technologies we take for granted. How people viewed them early on, and even today, though, now you still have people who claim that like their television's possessed or Satan kill somebody through their television, so there's still like that element of it where like someone who's maybe not well is, seeing, and I think it's because it's this illusion of life. It's giving us this view like to these people, and like like, I don't know about you, but like I like to turn the television on in the background. It just feels like there's more life in the house, like there's
absolutely. Yeah. Well, I love television. I think it's like the best. And yeah. Well, it's a weird invention, I guess you could say, but it's a weird part of a fabric of life where it's in almost everybody has a TV. Like, people who don't have a TV are kind of strange at this point. I guess if you're younger, you might not even need a TV. You get a tablet or whatever. But it's like, to me, television is, there's a guy, he used to have a radio show like 20 years ago. I think he still does. Jeff Rentz, very controversial.
Oh, yeah, I'm familiar with Rentz.
He used to always talk about like the greatest trick they ever pulled was to get a TV into every home in America. It's like brainwash us now and all this other shit. And it was like, well, he's not really wrong about that necessarily. It's like, it was pretty clever of them to somehow to get these devices in everybody's homes that could shape their minds and thoughts on what's going on in the world. Have you ever looked at, this is kind of off the beaten path, but have you ever looked at I think it was mentioned in one of your articles sort of in passing, but and oh Christ, I think it may have been something that Kramer said. I apologize.
I'm always he's an entertaining guy.
But have you ever looked at I think that probably was what pinged me, because it's a subject I've looked at before. Mammoths, the sort of idea that they were mammoths, in the western part of the United States, maybe Western Canada, maybe even up to Alaska.
But Thomas Jefferson wrote about that.
Right.
I definitely read about it. It's definitely, I have a file on it. It's something I'd like to dig into a little further for sure. I mean, it's compelling, we'd love to, right? Like, they didn't die out like, in cosmic time not that long ago. There were people.
Right. It's just a really interesting sort of like lost cryptid in a sense.
Yeah. Well, even like, like some of the, some of these like this megafauna, like where, the early Native Americans were here with it. I mean, that's one of the, that sort might, some people think that plays into the Thunderbirds as well, because Teratorns, which were larger, birds, kind of like the condor, they died out about 12,000 years ago. So, it's, possibly that, they might've played a role in sort of like oral history, like, or at least, they might've been associated, like, again, with like how birds ride the air, like when a storm is approaching, so there is thought that, that kind of, they made of, these birds that once existed might sort of be in the stew there.
Yeah, well, it's interesting in a sense too. If you think about it, it's like there seems to be some kind of like human yearning for the dinosaurs to be around, for remnant dinosaurs to be around, because you got the Thunderbirds, right, which are often likened to pterodactyls in some instances. One strain of Thunderbird is sort of pterodactyl-esque. Sure. Or sauropod.
It's Thunderbird. When we say that, it's an umbrella term for many things.
Right. When I grew up as a kid, there were 9 planets and there were like 6 dinosaurs. Now there's like fucking 40 million of them. They're always changing dinosaurs constantly. It's like,
and then they have feathers, and then they're not walking up. Yeah. It doesn't really, like, you're right though, because that's one thing. I mean, I don't know. I guess I don't keep up with the latest things that like kids are into, but I know, like, from kids in my life, that they're still in the dinosaurs. The dinosaurs never go out of style. It's just part of our makeup that we find them fascinating, and so sure, we want to see them.
Do you have the Thunderbird in the sky? You got the Mokele Membe in the jungles, and you got Nessie over in Scotland, and it's like they're all remnant dinosaurs, essentially. It's an interesting psychological thing, I guess. I don't know why it's sort of in the zeitgeist that we yearn for the dinosaurs.
You would think it would be, and it probably is in our genetic, in our lizard brain, as they say, to fear them.
Right.
But somehow it turns into being fascinated. Like we can't stop thinking about them. So maybe it's part of a survival instinct. I don't know. And today it shows itself as just wanting to constantly, have these things represented in some way.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And, I know they're like, oh, humans and dinosaurs, they weren't around at the same time. Look, probably not. But part of me is like, I don't know. Maybe there's something hardwired into us from them being together at the same time. I don't know. But there's just something, I don't know. It really catches hold of the human mind in a way that is very strange. And
I do think, I think the creationist crowd also helps fuel the interest in like cryptid dinosaurs. Because in their worldview, the planet's only like 10,000 years old. So, there are websites out there where they have all the examples. That's what you'll see the Thunderbird photo pop up on there. Like like any evidence that like Macaulay Mbembe, I have trouble saying. Yeah. Baby, the Lost Legend. I remember that movie. Yeah, years ago. But that's what that's about. So, I do think, that I think there's definitely an element of that. Like there's a guy named Jonathan Whitcomb. He has a channel called Protect Animal Life. He reports on ropin sightings, living, nice. As he says, living pterosaur sightings, they're apparently coming into him, but that's, I know I believe he has that. I don't want to speak for him, but just looking at his work, I believe that's sort of the impetus there, but again, so apparently all these people are saying they see these things, and in my mind, that I'm interested in that because it folds into, mystery flying creature topics. So, yeah. It's odd. Yeah. It's sort of, I hate the people that are like, well, everyone has a cell phone, so how come no one takes a picture of UFOs or whatever? So it also could say the same thing about these flying creatures where it's like, all right, people are flying all the time. That's the other thing about like Thunderbirds. There really isn't much evidence. So the Thunderbird photo would be great. I mean, but aside from that, you really only there's a video that was shot in the 70s that's supposed to show them in Illinois. I think I've seen that. Yeah. It's kind of a spooky video. It's like you're watching and you're like, man, they're probably just large turkey vultures. But then at one point you see one fly. You're like, gee, I don't know. The wings look a little different than a turkey vulture. They look a little longer. Yeah. I talked to Chief Huffer, AJ Huffer. He's the one who shot that in the 70s, and he passed away a couple years ago. But I did speak with him once, and up until the present day, he insists that that's what it was. That what he's like. I know turkey vultures, and it was something. And this was not long after the famous case with Marlon Lowe, who was the boy that was supposedly picked up by these things, and they tried to abduct him out in Lawndale, Illinois. So, so were these the birds that he encountered? And those birds were described as like large, like condor or vulture-like birds, but they shouldn't be able to pick you up with their claws because they're not made for really grasping. They peck at dead things. They're not. They're not, I mean, a vulture might look scary, but but it's just nature's garbage man. It's not like a hawk or an eagle that wants to fly down and catch something and eat live prey. It wants dead prey, and it doesn't have the structure in its claw, in its toes to grasp and pick something up and carry it. So, yeah. So and that's quite a mystery, that case from the 70s in Lawndale. And Marlon still does interviews today, and he hasn't changed his story as far as I'm aware. So. Interesting. Flying cryptids, man, they get no respect. They really don't. But. And of course, in Mothman, when that was originally reported, before it sort of took hold. I mean, that was called like they were called giant bird sightings. So yeah, exactly. Yeah, then it kind of evolved into like a humanoid type. Winged humanoid, and it's. Oh, and don't get me wrong. I mean, I'm fascinated by the Mothman stories, and It's so, but it was kind of interesting. Like Sanderson, I was able to get copies of he had a folder on Thunderbirds, which did not have the photo in it. That might have at one time, but didn't when I saw it. And that actually had some of those early, like Mothman, what became Mothman reports in there. So I know in his mind, he originally filed it there probably before, maybe Keel got involved and more was known about it.
Yeah. That's quite the story, the Mothman. It's it's a interesting case. I don't even know what to make of it. So where do you, I guess, as we head toward the end here, like you're a strange historian, let's say. So where do you sort of come up with the ideas for stuff you're going to write about? And where do you find this stuff? Because I'm very impressed. You say you've talked to you talk to a lot of these folks. Which I really appreciate, because I've suggested this to other guests where it's like, well, have you gone back and talked to this person who was in the story from 1985 or whatever? And it's like, they almost never do. And it's like, well, if they're still around, couldn't hurt to hit them up like 30, 40 years later and see what they have to say.
So I definitely, with the, with certain cases that are more modern, basically my email and my phone line's open. I get people that contact me on a fairly regular basis reporting Thunderbirds. So, I do talk to witnesses and publish their reports. And I'm always, just like I think anybody you talk to who talks to witnesses, I'm always impressed that they're willing to put this out there. So you could always say somebody's lying, they want attention. But then, you get people that when you talk to them and man, they really seem shaken up and they're looking for answers, and they don't, they're trying to accept this paradox in their life. They're trying to understand it. So, I see that a lot. And, now, of course, the historical stories I report on, the most of those people are dead, but so I'm really, just trying to take advantage of the wealth of documentation we have online to not just stop at like, oh, let's look at this original news article, let's look at the historical context, let's try to dig and get the actual, I try to do like a forensic search and get this story, and then, so that's a lot of it. I wish I could say I've had more encounters myself that fueled it, but the funny thing is the Phantom automobile thing is the one where I kind of have a story. It's not. I don't think it was paranormal, but it was weird, right?
What is it? Now I got to hear it. What's the story?
So many years ago, I was driving out to visit a friend who lived in Ohio. I live in New Jersey. I've been
trying to figure out since you got on my radar where you're located.
Oh, I'm in Jersey Devil territory is where I live.
All right. So I'm like, is it Pennsylvania? Is he Ohio? I don't think New Jersey ever crossed my mind. So I was going to ask you that before the end of the show. Okay, so you're driving. I
didn't ask you for the gabagool, Yeah. No. So I at the time I decided I don't want to drive in like traffic, so I'm going to leave after rush hour, and I'll get there late at night. I forget how many hours it is from New Jersey to Ohio, like 10 hours. I don't know. It was 6 hours out. It was a long time. So I'm driving and I'm not falling asleep, and I'm definitely getting a little like tired and punchy. Right. So I can't, so things started to take on this almost surrealistic, realm. I know I wasn't hallucinating, but I definitely, I was primed for it. So I look in my rearview mirror, and in the distance on the road, I see these lights approaching, and they look purple. And that's different. This is almost 20 years ago. You don't like today. You have a lot of different color LEDs and things. This was before that. But so I can tell there's this car behind me, and it's going a pretty good clip. And I can tell it's like cruising. It's really gunning it. So I watch as in my rearview mirror as it gets closer and closer, and it's purpler and purpler. And finally, it pulls beside me on my right in the right lane, and I look over, and I swear to God, a purple car with purple lights, and it was like a 1930s like coupe. The top was down, and driving it was a woman dressed like the era, right? So I don't think it was like a ghost, but I think it was definitely someone who was out doing this late night. It was like kind of like not a cosplay thing, but like classic car, maybe dress the part. But the car was all lit up beautifully with these lights, and then she just, I don't know what was under the hood of this car, but it just pulled out and just those purple lights just disappeared into the distance, and I'm like, man, that was bonkers. What was that?
Did you like make any eye contact with her?
I mean, I saw her. She was right next to me. I saw her.
I didn't know if you guys like looked at each other. Okay, yeah.
No, I wish. I was kind of waiting for like, oh hey, look at me in my cool car. But yeah, it was like, I would say a 30s or 40s car. I don't know what model, but but again, the top was down, and I think she had on like a white kind of, I don't want to say it was like a flapper outfit, but it was like kind of a nice like a well-dressed outfit from back then with a hat. So yeah,
you didn't mention what I was thinking. Time loop. So kind of time.
I love those stories. Like there's a story. If any of your listeners can find this, I remember reading it when I was a kid, and I wish I could find it again. And find out more details. There was a story about a family, like I want to say it was the 50s or 60s. They were driving like on a family road trip, like vacation, and there was just like my story, like a vehicle pulled beside them, but it looked like futuristic. It was like almost like a silver, and they saw another family, and they looked at each other like, so sort of like, like timelines crossing paths. So I would love to find that story again and see what the details were. But so anyway, that so that was in the back of my head when I started, I think, searching for phantom automobiles, only to learn that, oh yeah, this is like, this is the thing, or at least was at one point in time. Although there's a story in the book that's from like the I think it was like 2014, of people who, like, there would be these phantom headlights coming down their driveway, and the crunch of gravel, even though there was no longer a gravel driveway, it was paved.
Oh, weird.
Yeah.
Oh, that's spooky. Yeah.
Yeah. They might still be out there, but so that one definitely is near and dear to my heart, that chapter.
Phantom cars. Yeah, that's a wild story. Yeah, my first inclination was time loop, but I
would love to think that. I mean, I think that the most likely explanation, it was somebody who's just enjoyed cruising in their classic car, but
yeah,
certainly it wasn't your typical classic that you see out there, historic vehicle.
Yeah, for sure. And we only scratched the surface of the stuff that's covered on the blog and in the books. There's Bigfoot. There's a UFO crash.
Yeah.
There's some creatures, all kinds of creatures. So people want to check that out. The book is there's two of them. And you I guess you sort of have been doing the research of these expanded from the blog posts, I assume, right? The book.
Yeah, it's like, I would say these are the final versions. I write them, I post them online. I really do. It helps me, and I factor in, when people comment, because sometimes somebody will mention something I didn't even think about and lead me to, and so it just creates a better final report. I'm trying to get a better final report on the top.
Yeah, so the books are an anthology of American Strangeness, Volume 1 and Volume 2. And they're out there on Amazon. You can get them, wherever you get books, essentially. And the website is thunderbirdphoto.com. And that's where you can find. I'm just amused because it's like, so you see, like, you started as the Thunderbird guy. Now you're branching out. It's like,
in fact, I actually, if you type in American Strangeness, I can't talk today. AmericanStrangeness.com, you'll get to the same blog. Okay. It was kind of like, I started out like everything's about this Thunderbird photo, but I quickly realized I'm really interested in all this stuff, why limit, and I just keep finding these these just awesome stories. And I really try to focus on things that either haven't been reported or haven't been reported much, or some new aspect on a more well-known topic. I just try to, I just want to add something new to the conversation.
Absolutely. Well, you've done that. And you've put out some tremendous stuff at the website. And I like I said, I devoured that post on the Thunderbird photo.
Glad to hear that.
Yeah, I loved it, dude. I loved it. Well, you can tell just because this Kramer guy is haunting me now.
And there's so much. I'll have to, though. There's much more on him too. when I'm continually working on that book. It's just, as I said, as you can tell, that one involved a lot of interviews and research and going to the place where all this happened.
Yeah.
So, it's taken longer to sort of, put it together because I want it to be right, and I want it to be sort of like definitive if I can. But
yeah, that's what I was going to ask you, because you said so what's just generally, so you got the next book you're working on is cryptobotany.
Yeah, that's close to finished. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So hopefully sometime, in the next year, let's say.
Yeah, I would. Yeah, it's definitely. It's like it's been long enough. People keep asking me for it. I can tell there's definitely a desire to for this particular topic. So
yeah,
I want to give people. I want to just and you kind of. I think I struggled. I think in my own head with the idea of ownership early on. Like what's somebody else doing on this? And then over time you learn that you're part of a community and that you're going to put out your research and then somebody else is going to pick up that ball later on. And, and in the meantime, people are, going to enjoy this overall story. So I hope I can do that. I wish I could, open that magazine and say, here's the photo, but I think the story behind it, as you say, like Kramer, just all these just characters, is almost as interesting as the mystery itself.
Yeah, it's tremendous. It's really, I'm afraid, is there like a Reddit group just for the photo?
There isn't just for the photo. There is on Discord. There's a Lost Media Discord, and there is like a sub forum for it.
I'm gonna start digging into this, and I'm afraid down this rabbit hole. So crypto. I don't think, and you'll correct me, I'm sure, if I'm wrong, but I don't. I mean, and look, if anyone like a guy like Brad Steiger probably did, but I don't know of any cryptobotany books that have been put out.
I haven't seen them. I mean, there are some books and they're like more pertaining to, I want to say fiction. It could all be fiction, but pertaining to the stories that were printed, like this is fiction, right? Of course, I love the stuff that's more like has that veil, sort of has that haze of truth, so, or it was presented that way. I have yet to see a book dedicated to it. So I'm hoping I'll be the first, and I hope it's pretty, pretty thorough. Other well-known authors have done a lot of work on it though, like Carl Schuker, especially.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
He's a great guy. And in the Fortean community, like his research is awesome. He's done a lot on man-eating plants.
Yeah, Carl's tremendous. I've been meaning to get him on Binnall America for years.
I'm sure he'd be wonderful.
All right, so that's the thing. And then, what do you have a sort of rough timetable in mind? Because I would love to read this book on the Thunderbird photo.
I mean, so my goal, I don't want to go like George R. Martin. I said this.
Yeah.
But realistically, because I have been working on it, I think my goal is to get it out this coming year. The book about the plants should probably be out by the end of the summer. And that's really close. And then after that, that's it. I'm focused on the other book. And I think having worked on a few books before, to learn the process, also, I feel like it's helped me, like, maybe I'll put out a better end product,
that makes sense.
A few years ago.
That's absolutely. We all get better as we go along and get more seasoning. All right. Well, we'll be getting you back on the show in the future.
I'd love to. This flew by. It's been a pleasure talking.
Absolutely, dude. You've uncovered some really cool stuff. You're writing about some awesome stuff, and you're a really great writer. And I like how you also include at the end all the footnotes and everything to follow up and sort of. The sources of stuff where people can go and look it up and everything. I'm obsessive about
sourcing. And I also want to say, like, for anybody, like, there's a lot of funny stuff here too. Like, I love the humorous bent too. So, if you like that kind of, there, some of these stories definitely have like a sort of a, either, funny or just kind of ridiculous aspect to part of them. So.
Yeah, that's one of the great things about Strange History is more often than not, it's like there's a element of absurdity to it. Where you're
Exactly.
like,
That's the word I'm
kind of
trying to get out. Yeah.
look at it askance. Well, with all that said, thank you so much for coming on the show, Kevin. Again, the website is thunderbirdphoto.com. Check it out, folks. You will absolutely love it. And check out the books, An Anthology of American Strangeness, Volumes 1 and 2. Thank you again, my friend.
Thank you, Tim. Talk to you later.